Okay, so we have feedback for when we're looking at the crystal. Now, while we're looking at it, we want to be able to collect it. So let's go ahead and add another state to our crystal collection FSM. And this will be our, we'll call that collected, because we're going to do a couple of things so the player knows that they have this in their inventory. So this is collected. We need to get into that state from our looking at state. So I'm going to create another event, and I'm going to call this clicked. And I'm going to right click on this state and say add transition clicked. And then I will point that clicked to our collected state. Now I need to attach an action to make sure that this clicked event is sent. So I'll double click, and I'm going to use a get mouse down, get mouse button down. So we're just going to transition. We're going to collect this with a mouse click left, and we will send the event clicked. All right. So let's go ahead and just test that briefly to make sure it's working. So we look at the objects and we're in the collected state, and when we're not looking at the object and I try to click, of course nothing is happening. So when I'm looking at it and I click, now we'll be moved into that collected state. So in that collected state, all we're going to do to the game object itself is we're going to disable the mesh render. If we turn off the object, it's going to turn off the FSMs with it, and we're not going to be able to do the other things that we want to do. Or, you know, alternatively, what we could do is we could do the actions that we would like to do first, and then we can disable the game object, which might be a little bit faster to do. So let's go ahead and do that. So, okay. The first thing that I would like to do is we need to remember that we've collected this crystal. So to remember it, we're going to store this crystal collection as a variable. So I'm going to go ahead and create a variable, but I want to be able to access this variable from other FSMs as well. So instead of creating a normal variable, I'm going to create a global variable. So I'll click on that global variable button at the bottom of the variable tab, which is going to give me my global window. And I'm going to create just a bool, because I just want to know whether or not, yes or no, whether or not I've collected this red crystal. So I'm going to call this has red crystal. The answer is just yes or no. So let me go ahead and add that. Okay, that's going to create a global variable asset in my project. So there we go. So now we have a has red crystal, and that's a bool. And now any FSM in the scene can access this variable or set this variable. So before we destroy this crystal in our collected state, let's go ahead and change that global variable. So I will type in, all we need to do is we need to set that Boolean. So we're just going to do a bool set bool value. So I will double click on set bool value. The bool value that we want to access is that global has red crystal, and we want to say yes, we do have it. We've collected it. The next thing that we want to do is we want to give feedback to the player that that red crystal is now stored in their inventory. So to do that, we're going to create a little bit of GUI. And in my hierarchy, I'll right click and say create UI. And I want to create a image. So with that image created, let me go ahead and zoom out here. So now we have our UI canvas, and that image is parented beneath that canvas. So let me go ahead and double click on this to change the name. So instead of image, we'll call that a red crystal GUI. And we need to put an image into the image slot. That's going to be a sprite. So let me look through my project here. And underneath my textures, you see I have a couple of images I've prepared. So we have just a crystal and all the colors that we're going to be collecting. So there's our red crystal. In order to use this in our UI, that needs to be marked as a sprite. So in the import options, I need to set the texture type from default to sprite 2D and UI. And I'll just go ahead and apply that. And there we go. This is now a sprite. I'm going to do that to my blue crystal and yellow crystal as well. So texture type, sprite, and apply. Okay, so now we're set. We can plug these into our UI now. I'm going to select the red crystal GUI there. Let me minimize that. I'll just go ahead and drag and drop the red crystal like so. And now we have a piece of UI. And I'm going to reposition that guy. Let's see here. I'll put that in the center of our canvas. I can push T on the keyboard to enter my special manipulator for GUI elements. And I want to set that rec transform. I'll go ahead and nest these things to the bottom center of my screen. So these rec transforms, those represent our scale points for the image. And so we're just going to go ahead and lower that to the bottom of our screen. And so if I look at my game screen now, it has that UI overlaid on top of it. But if I try to resize this game window to represent a different aspect ratio, you'll notice that bit of GUI image, it's not scaling with our canvas. So to turn that on, to make sure that it scales with our canvas, we'll grab the canvas in our hierarchy, and under canvas scaler script, we're going to select scale with screen size. So now if we stretch our canvas by stretching our game window, you can see that maintains a consistent size, which is what we want. Great, okay. So let's just, while we're here, let's go ahead and hook up the blue and yellow crystal GUIs as well. So I'm going to duplicate that image, and I'll just rename this yellow crystal GUI and blue crystal GUI. There we go. So I'll take that yellow, and I can do that with W. I can just pull that to the side, like so. And then we'll move the blue in the opposite direction. All right, that works. And whoops. Let's go ahead and plug in the appropriate textures. So the blue crystal, that's going to go ahead and get the blue crystal image, like that. And the yellow crystal, that'll get the yellow crystal image, like so. Okay, so let's click back into our game window and let's check that out. So that's what that looks like by default. And of course we can test it and we can see how that scales with everything else. Okay, so that works. So by default, these are not going to be turned on. These are not going to be activated until we actually collect the specific colored crystal. So by default, just like the crystals that are in that door, these game objects will be deactivated, and as we collect them, we can turn them back on. So that's what we want to do. Now, if I click back into that crystal red game object, if I'm in that collection FSM, that's one of the actions we want to do before we turn the game object off. We want to activate that game object. So back in that collected state, I will double click, and I'm going to use, is it called enable or is it called activate? Enable doesn't work. Activate does work. So we're going to use the activate game object. Let me double click that to put it into my state stack. So we just need to specify what game object we want to activate. So I will say specify game object, and I will drag and drop the red crystal into the game object slot. So we're gonna record the variable has red crystal, And we're going to activate a piece of GUI on the screen that tells the player that they now have this in their inventory to reflect the fact that that boolean has been turned on. All right, so let's give this a playthrough, and let's see if we can at least get that GUI to turn on. So okay, we're going to go over to the red crystal, mouse over it, click on it, and there we go. We have it in our inventory now. The last thing that we need to do is just make sure that that game object gets turned off. And that'll stand in for the fact that we've collected it and it's in our inventory. So at the bottom of the stack, right, and remember that the actions occur in the order that they are placed in the stack. So the top actions happen first. So we're going to do these things, and then finally, when those are done, we will do another activate game object, and we're just going to deactivate the game object's red crystal itself. So under activate game object options, we're just going to turn off the activate, which stands for deactivate, and we are going to use the owner. Okay, so let's give that a shot. Let's see if that works. In play mode, go over to the objects, moused over, click on it, boom. Okay, so we've recorded the fact that we have it in a bool, we have it in our UI, and the game object disappeared. So now we have in our inventory. While it's in our inventory, we want to be able to now place this in the doorway. We want to set that crystal into one of the slots. So let's go ahead and set that up next.